Everyone here, everyone literally maybe is here. So nice to see everyone. Whether you're joining us in person or in Champlain or on Zoom. We have two main items to consider today. The first is the audit of the automated speed enforcement and red light camera program. Auditor General Natalie Goujon will introduce the item, and Deputy Auditor General Joanne Gorenstein will deliver an approximately 10-minute presentation on this report. After the presentation, the Office of the Auditor General will take questions about the audit, starting with committee members, followed by any other members of council who may be present. After questions to the Office of the Auditor General are finished, then we'll go to questions to city staff. Following questions, we'll vote to receive the report and submit it to council for consideration. Our second item is the semi-annual report on follow-up procedures. Auditor General Goujon will introduce the item, and Audit Principal Rhea Khan will provide a 5-minute presentation. And sorry, I put in my email that there was no presentation. There is a presentation. I was wrong. The Office of the Auditor General will take questions after the presentation. Then we'll go to questions for staff. We'll vote to receive the report and submit it to council for its consideration. All right, let's get started. I noticed that we have no regrets, and I'll ask the committee coordinator to call the roll.
Councillor Brown.
Here.
Councillor Carr.
Present.
Councillor Hill.
Present.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Present.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Vice Chair Hubley.
Here.
Chair Curry.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll note that we have no declarations of interest. Confirmation of minutes. Audit Committee minutes 10 from Monday, February the 10th, 2025. Are these minutes carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. All right. And we will move to the Auditor General.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Eric, si tu peux, s'il vous plaît, partager la présentation. Merci beaucoup. Le premier rapport que nous souhaitons vous présenter aujourd'hui porte sur la vérification du programme de contrôle automatisé de la vitesse et du programme de caméras reliées au feu rouge. Je suis aujourd'hui aux côtés de Clinton Griffiths, associé délégué d'Orbis Risk Consulting, qui a aidé notre bureau à mener cette mission de vérification. Il sera à votre disposition pour répondre à vos questions ainsi que mon équipe à la fin de la présentation. Nous tenons à préciser que l'équipe d'Orbis comprenait un expert des questions de sécurité routière qui a apporté un éclairage sur les règles de l'art. As just mentioned, with us today is Clinton Griffiths, Associate Partner from Orbis Risk Consulting, who supported our office in conducting this audit. Clinton will be available to answer questions along with my team at the end of the presentation. We would like to highlight that the Orbis team also included a safety subject matter expert that provided insights related to best practices. Je vais maintenant céder la parole à Joanne Gorenstein, vérificatrice générale adjointe, qui vous présentera les résultats de notre mission. Merci et prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, members of committee, and councillors. Much like many other municipalities in Canada, the City of Ottawa has moved towards automated technologies to enhance road safety and reduce traffic violations. Two programs which are currently in operation within the city are red light cameras and automated speed enforcement. The red light cameras are being used to capture images of vehicles running red lights, deterring dangerous behavior and improving safety at intersections. This program currently has 77 cameras in operation across the city. In 2024, there were 42,500 violations, which generated $11.3 million in gross revenues. The Automated Speed Enforcement Program, which was launched as a pilot in 2020 and approved for expansion in 2021, uses cameras to help monitor and enforce speed limits, thereby reducing speed-related collisions. As of December 2024, there were 57 automated speed cameras in operation across the city, primarily placed around school zones and playgrounds, with the exception of 4 high-speed road locations selected as part of a more recent pilot. In 2024, there were approximately 384,000 violations, generating gross revenues of $29 million. The city is committed to improving road safety and as a result established and is implementing the Road Safety Action Plan. This aims to reduce the average annual rate of fatal and major injury collisions across the city. The red light camera and automated speed enforcement programs are key components in this plan. Next slide, please. The objective of this audit was to assess the efficiency and effectiveness of the city's automated speed enforcement and red light camera programs, specifically how these programs are aligned with council direction and how they are implemented and monitored, including alignment with the Road Safety Action Plan. The audit focused on the period from January 1st, 2023 to September 30th, 2024. Next slide, please. Our audit confirmed that both the red light camera and automated speed enforcement programs are well established with formalized processes and controls. This includes the processing center, which only commenced operations for automated speed infractions in February 2024, which has embedded controls and a formal quality assurance process. Through benchmarking conducted against other municipalities, we observed multiple best practices embedded within the city's programs, including the use of data-driven site selection methodology for determining placement of cameras. Our audit did identify some findings as well as opportunities for improvement, specifically for the automated speed program as it continues to evolve. The first finding relates to the use of the revenues for the red light camera program. The Road Safety Action Plan, which was approved by Council in December 2019, included a recommendation related to red light camera revenue and what would be allocated to this plan for dedicated use towards road safety initiatives. The Council recommendation stated that all revenues from automated enforcement, including revenues from new red light cameras installed beyond 2020, be allocated to the Road Safety Action Plan program for implementation of countermeasures beyond 2020, beyond 2020, be allocated to the Road Safety Action Plan program for implementation of countermeasures identified in the 2020 to 2024 Road Safety Action Plan report. Our audit noted that since that council direction, no revenue from net new red light cameras program have been exclusively allocated to the city's, I apologize. No revenue from the net new red light cameras has been allocated to the Road Safety Reserve Fund. The revenue generated from the red light camera program has been exclusively allocated to the city's operating budget, along with an annual transfer to the Ottawa Police Service. Management indicated that when the Road Safety Action Plan was developed in 2019, a baseline revenue target for the red light camera program was established, outlining the amount to continue to allocate to the city's general operating budget. This internally established baseline was set at $11.75 million, which was calculated using average revenue expected from each red light camera installed pre-2020. Additionally, management indicated a decision was made in 2019 to allocate $3 million of red light camera revenue annually to the Ottawa Police Service to help close a funding gap. Despite the fact that 24 red light cameras have been installed since 2020, the audit found that the program has fallen short of the established baseline target of $11.75 million set by management since 2021. Management has indicated that this was caused by a combination of changes in driver behavior and the result of the pandemic, with less cars on the road. Management has indicated that it was assumed that council's direction would not have an impact on the operating budget, and that unless the established target was met, no red light camera revenues would be transferred to the Road Safety Action Plan initiatives. Based on our own analysis of ticket volume generated by new red light cameras introduced after 2020, we calculated that approximately $10.7 million in gross revenues have been generated by these cameras between 2021 and 2024 that could have been allocated specifically to Road Safety Action Plan initiatives. It should be noted that our estimate was based on available information and did not take into account any uncollectible amounts. You may have heard a figure of $41 million in the media, but this was all revenues earned between 2021 and 2024 from the red light camera program, and not what we estimated as what should have been allocated to road safety initiatives from this program. Not allocating net new revenues generated from new red light cameras installed after 2020 to the dedicated Road Safety Reserve Fund means that these funds may not have been used exclusively for road safety initiatives. The second finding is related to performance measurement, With regards to the automated speed enforcement program, we found that the city has established key performance indicators with its road safety action plan annual report, which include the percentage of drivers that comply with the posted speed limits and instances of high-end speeding. While these indicators demonstrate that drivers are slowing down at camera sites, by only focusing on the reduction in speed, they do not provide a complete picture of the program's contributions to broader road safety and outcomes, for example, reductions in collisions. As it relates to the red light camera program, we found that the city has not established any formal key performance indicators to demonstrate its impact on program outcomes. Additionally, the audit found that no formal reporting is in place for the red light camera program, either within the Road Safety Action Plan annual report or through other mechanisms. Overall, not establishing and reporting on a fulsome set of performance indicators impacts the ability of the city to demonstrate the program's contribution to road safety outcomes. Next slide, please. Now to the opportunities identified from the audit which relate to the automated speed enforcement program as it continues to evolve. The observations noted here would result in improved efficiencies and/or program outcomes. The first is related to the site selection methodology. To date, council direction has been to focus on the placement of speed cameras near school zones and more recently near playgrounds to address speeding risks for vulnerable road users. While a formal methodology exists for the selection of speed cameras, this methodology prioritizes excessive speeder and pedestrian volume, specifically weighting those factors at 85%. While the city's current focus on speeding and traffic volume are important considerations in determining where to place cameras, it can result in a disproportionate weighting of traffic data, leaving other critical safety elements underrepresented or excluded. As the city continues to evolve the program outside of school zones and playgrounds, there is an opportunity to seek out additional data points on potential locations and holistically review the site selection methodology for application across these potential sites. This will help ensure that sites selected will most meaningfully contribute to the overall objective of the Road Safety Action Plan. The second opportunity is related to the new processing center. Until February 2024, the city relied on Toronto's Joint Processing Center for automated speed enforcement infractions. Capacity constraints led to delays, resulting in lost fine revenue. To address this, the city established its own processing center. Since its launch, the processing center has been able to ensure that all tickets are processed within the required timeframe. We noted the processing center currently has sufficient capacity and space for current needs and can scale as demand grows. However, benchmarking against other municipalities suggests that automation could further enhance efficiency by reducing manual workloads. As the city expands and explores expanding services, including the potential for processing for other municipalities and managing more cameras, automated investments will be key to sustaining efficiency and growth. Next slide, please. I will now pass the presentation back to the Auditor General to wrap up.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Chair, if I may, there's obviously been a lot of discussion on our report, whether it be from members of council, and it's nice to see a lot of extra faces around the table this morning, or members of the public. So I just wanted to quickly summarize on what it is our report is trying to state. So obviously, we are highlighting many good practices with both programs. So I don't want to lose sight of that. I think that's a piece that, we tend to look at the main findings of our report, but we are seeing a lot of very good practices, which is why you're not seeing 20 recommendations from our report. Our main finding is highlighting that a council direction dating back to 2019 has not been implemented to the letter. Management has indicated to us that they felt that council had an understanding that there wouldn't be any tax implications with that direction. We are highlighting that we weren't able to obtain any documentation that would demonstrate their decision or that would give us comfort that councillors all had a consistent understanding of this particular assumption that was made. To ensure alignment and for greater transparency moving forward, we're recommending that staff review the red light camera revenue allocation and that they bring it back to council for direction and for approval moving forward. What our report is not saying Our report is not saying that the city isn't funding road safety initiatives. It is. It was before these programs and it still continues to do so. So that is a very distinct piece. If I go back to, I think, the 2019 direction, I think there was $25 million in road safety initiatives back then and an estimated 27.5 for the 2020 budget. Obviously, you could presume that that would have continued to occur. I do want to highlight, we didn't look at the road safety action plan. That wasn't an aspect. So if there are any questions on that, we'll actually have to defer that over to management. We are also not making any comments with regards to the appropriateness of the allocation to the Ottawa Police Service or the use of those particular funds. I think that's very important. What we are stating is we're asking staff, specifically City of Ottawa staff, to review and to obtain reporting from OPS on the use of those funds and to report that back to committee. So those are a couple of key pieces that we are not stating in our report and that we're not commenting on. So I just want to make sure that that's also clear. I hope that provides a little bit of clarity, and we'd now be happy to take any questions committee members and members of council may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that clarity. Thank you very much for the report. And I will say, so we won't be entertaining questions about the police services allocation, but last night at Police Services Board, there was a motion passed that has been talked about for the last few months about police reporting specifically on how they're spending the $3 million so that council, everyone can see how that money is being allocated within the police services. So that was passed last night at the Police Services Board meeting. So you can expect that going forward. So that might help everyone as well. All right. So questions to the Auditor General and from committee members first, Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. Just a note, thank you very much for all the work that has gone into this audit. I'm always so impressed with how much work goes into determining the scope, getting all the interviews done, gathering all the information, and then coming up with such succinct recommendations. I know it looks like a simple report, but I know a lot goes into it. And I've said previously at this committee, I'm a bit of an audit enthusiast because we rely so heavily on these recommendations in our role as councillors and as members of this audit committee. I just want to confirm a few comments that you made to the Auditor General on the scope of the audit. So my understanding is really that it is specific to how the programs align with that direction of council, and that the scope of the audit is limited to January 1st, 2023 and September 30th, 2024, correct?
That is correct. So the only mention pre that is obviously we give context with regards to revenues generated from the program just to kind of see the trends. And obviously we are referring back to the 2019 council direction, which is the basis for the revenue allocations.
Thank you. And so the reason why there was no mention of the allocation, for example, of the automated speed enforcement funding to the Ottawa Police Services was because that was done after the time period, correct?
That would be one reason. The other reason is because the Ottawa Police Service is not in scope for our particular review. As I'm sure you're familiar as a member of the board, my purview for OPS only lays with what is approved in our OPS specific audit plan.
Thanks. And I'll just add to Chair Curry's comment, the motion passed last night also included the funding for the ASE for the reporting on that as well. So I just also wanted to confirm that when you looked at all of the paperwork, could you find any evidence that the allocation of $3 million a year, for example, to the OPS was specific to the road safety action plan?
So Chair, as I just mentioned, it wasn't necessarily in the scope of our audit. I can state that a member of council did share with me a letter dating back to 2019 that communicated from the then chief of police to the then chair of the board that there was going to be utilization of some red light camera related revenues in order to help fund a budget deficit.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just say that was me that provided that to you. So I was a little bit surprised about that and that it was never discussed. I've reviewed council meetings. Nobody ever questioned that over the years. So, and when you talk about not following council direction, when I go back and I read the 2019 Transportation Committee meeting, I think it was Chair Eglai, when that was passed, would that automatically have superseded all of the other directions by council. Is that what happens?
Chair, I would direct that to the clerk's office with regards to process. It is not for me to necessarily judge what supersedes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll save that one for the staff. We'll have the staff things. As the Auditor General, are you of the view that if there are changes that need to be made to these programs in terms of what committee it reports to, KPIs and everything, that all of that is all covered in the recommendations?
So Chair, I would say with regards to things such as key performance indicators and just general reporting, absolutely. Those are some key recommendations that we are making. With regards to whom it's reported to, that is a council decision to make.
Thank you. And just a couple questions just on the process of audit, because I think there has been some confusion. So when you table when your report is released for committee, you cannot speak to that report until it's tabled here, correct?
Chair, that is correct. Well, I'll try to keep this short. What many members of committee and council may not know is I am the only Auditor General in Canada, that is municipal, provincial, and federal, that pre-releases reports. And this is the piece I will try to keep short. My rationale for doing that when I came into this role was I could clearly see that there was a significant level of distrust by the public with staff, members of council, and members of council with staff. And so what I was trying to do was bring a different level of transparency and obviously to continue to enforce the accountability that my office is supposed to bring. That was the rationale behind it. It would allow time for members of committee to clearly read our reports, to ask informed questions. It would allow members of the public, if they wanted to come delegate, to do so. They'd be able to sign up, understanding what it is that we are going to be speaking about. That being said, it does tie our hands, and by default, I do tie staff's hands as to we are not to speak to media with regards to the reports until they're discussed at committee, because this is where the key discussion is supposed to occur. That has been a difficult situation with this particular report, and I apologize. We have lots of members of council that have wanted to ask me numerous questions. Please know I'm usually a very transparent person, but anything I say to you in response to a question, in order to ensure that I keep my role as an accountability officer, I need to ensure that every word I speak is also spoken in a public forum. That's how I continue to build trust in members of the public and as well with all of you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that clarification. It's appreciated. I appreciate the fact that you release in advance so the public does have some transparency and understand what's being discussed. Of course, there's always the risk that when you can't speak to it and staff can't speak to it, that things get misinterpreted, and then it leaves yourselves, staff, and those of us that serve on the audit committee in an awkward position when there's an incorrect narrative, and that also can erode trust. But it's a balance, and I appreciate the fact that you do that. I did a quick scan and realized most municipalities don't do it. It's usually tabled the same day, and I looked at past processes with the Auditor Generals here at the city, and it seems that that's the process they followed. They would have a media release and then table it right away. So appreciate that, and understand that in this particular case, there was a lot of misinformation. But thank you very much again for all your work. I think the remainder of my questions are for staff.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. I don't have any other members of this committee asking questions. Councillor Menard?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for your report. I want to seek as much clarity as I can on the process and how we're adhering to it based on what council had set out. So I just want to be clear, because obviously, yeah, there's been articles written, there's been questions asked, but in your report, you stated that council gave specific direction through the 2019 Road Safety Action Plan, and I remember that. And it's that all revenue from automated enforcement, including automated speed enforcement, license plate recognition, bus cameras, etc., be allocated to the Road Safety Action Plan program for implementation of countermeasures identified in the 2020 to 2024 Road Safety Action Plan report. So is that occurring? Has that been occurred?
Thank you for the question through yourself, Chair. So our audit, so we saw obviously the same direction, and the instruction per the direction is that relative to the red light camera program, it would have been net new revenue from cameras installed post 2020 would be allocated to road safety action plan initiatives. And from that perspective, no, we have not seen that those funds going to from those cameras going to the road safety action plan initiatives. After that process of the automated speed cameras were not in place at that time. That was piloted in 2020 and then expanded in 2021. But since that point, we have seen, yes, that during our scope period, automated speed enforcement revenues have been transferred to the road safety action plan initiatives, which is now through the reserve fund.
Okay, that's helpful. The reason I'm asking this is we did have a discussion about this at the council table in December of 2020. And I remember at that time there was a motion about red light camera revenue and traffic calming measures, transportation committee utilizing some of those versus the police using some of those. And we were told at that time by staff that my understanding was this was to be slowly phased out, that that red light camera revenue that was going to police was going to be used instead for city resources to make intersections safer, to add to the traffic calming budget, all the good things the road safety action plan talks about. So I guess the concern would just be, where did the direction come that those funds would not be used for that, those purposes? Was there any type of internal discussion that led to a change from council direction? Or how did it happen? I saw the internal piece that you wrote about an internal decision around the 11 million, but how did it happen that there was a change in process of where those funds go?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Chair. In terms of the $3 billion to the Ottawa Police Service, we have seen that documentation that the councillor referenced from the 2019 budget process. So that $3 million would be allocated, or it didn't start at 3 million, but it eventually was $3 million annually to fund the gap. So that was internally, as we understand from management, that was continued. That assumption was continued in addition to the allocation of what was continued to be going to the general operation of the city. So in terms of documentation, what we can point to is that 2019 budget, OPS budget.
Yeah, because I just say in December of 2020, the allocated budget at that time was 1.2 million, somewhere around there. I think your document says 1.4, but I think in that budget we had seen a motion and discussion around 1.2 million. So that's steadily increased since that time. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. In terms of looking at the excerpt from the 2019 OPS budget, the amount that would be transferred from the red light camera revenue in 2020 was 1.8 million, going up to $3 million annually thereafter.
Right. I guess the concern would be I think there's 26 somewhere around that unsafe intersections that we've identified through the road safety action plan. It might be a little bit more, might be a little bit less, but those are expensive to fund. And I know they're right across the city. And we've said these really need attention, right? And so I guess the concern is people already think that, it's a cash grab to do the red light cameras or this automated speed enforcement. And we have these very important resources that need upgrades within the city. And that trust, if it's not following council direction, can get eroded. So I appreciate the report and definitely follow up with staff about a go forward. I think it's good to bring this to light because we can get better results in the future. So thanks for your report.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much. And I certainly watched the Police Services Board meeting yesterday and was quite delighted to see the motion come forward to support police in their reporting of the revenue coming from the automated speed enforcement and how they'll be able to allocate that directly to their traffic initiatives. So I'm very pleased to see that motion come through. We don't have the ability to direct the police on council. It's not within the scope. And certainly, I had a very healthy exchange with the police expertise on this matter back in December. And I think that motion will go a long way to demonstrating the checks and balances between the good work that the police are doing in the community and the money that they're receiving. So my question for the auditor is just kind of to make this into a plain speak, and then most of my questions will be for staff on the accounting portion for the tax revenue. So can I just understand from what you were saying, there was an existing assumption that there was a base budget of 11 point some million dollars to stay within the tax reserve. So we could imagine that as one bucket. And then the next bucket was the police allocation. I think both the police allocations were discussed at budget meetings, but the assumption is around the tax piece. So you've got a tax bucket, you've got a police bucket, and then you've got the road safety action plan bucket. So how did staff allocate the funds according to your findings? The first bucket to be filled up was the tax bucket, then it went to police, then it went to road safety. Is that correct?
Chair, that is our understanding, yes.
Okay, so we'll just ask staff to confirm that, but I can understand then in that sense, if we didn't hit the mark for how much needed to go in the tax bucket, we had less available for the other buckets.
From that theory, yes, that would be correct. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just trying to put this in a visual here for us to understand how the money goes. So if the tax bucket doesn't get filled up, we have less for those other two buckets, which includes the road safety reserve fund. And that's the concern that you found in the report.
Chair, yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dudas.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, it worked. I'm not the best with technology, so it was kind of hit or miss. I will have questions for staff, but for the AG. In your report, you touch on the interpretation around the 2019 direction from council. And your report certainly speaks to the fact that you did not identify any malfeasance. But can you clarify what was meant by this interpretation? Do you have any reason to believe that city staff were willingly not following or ignoring council's direction?
Chair, we did not find any evidence that would indicate that staff were purposely trying to circumvent a council direction. We did not find any information that would help support their internal decision either. That being said, as we do with our investigations, the same goes with our audits, as we take every statement provided to us in good faith, and then we continue to investigate those particular elements to see if they can be supported.
Okay, so as I was reading the outcome of the audit, and I was certainly getting that kind of sense from the words, although in some respects I was able to interpret it as being a little bit more, I don't know, salacious in its findings. And once again, I'm putting words in the report's mouth. I just wanted to clarify, you have a priority rating. And when you rated this particular report, it was, I think, second lowest on your rating. Can you just tell me how you rate your findings and then what it means in terms of our conversation today about this outcome?
Thank you for the question, Chair, through you. We have a rating system that has been implemented as of this year. It's a requirement by the Institute of Internal Auditors for us to abide by their standards. The rating scale that we have utilized is a 4 scale. Being critical, high, moderate, and low. This particular finding is deemed moderate. If you look at the appendix in our report, it gives very clear definitions of what those particular rankings are. Obviously, we're not stating this is critical. Critical essentially means that it would imminently impact the city in an ability to meet its strategic objectives. High being needs to be resolved ASAP, or else it could as well. Obviously, we rank this as moderate, being it can have an impact on the achievement of these various programs and the outcomes associated with them, but they're not critical in the sense of from a time sensitivity perspective. So,
For the clarification, I have no further questions, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to read you a sentence. All revenue generated from tickets issued via the automated speed enforcement program is reinvested into the City of Ottawa's Road Safety Action Plan program. That's not entirely correct, right? That all revenue
Well, when in doubt, first of all, it would be net revenue, right? You have to take away the cost of the programs.
Right, but even with net revenue, because we did allocate a portion to police this year through the 2025 budget. So I'm pointing that out because that's directly from the City of Ottawa website. So I do think that that's a problem. I appreciated the clarification that the council direction not being followed pertained to the red light cameras and not the automated speed enforcement cameras, because I think the two have been conflated in the media and otherwise. But I do think we need to be transparent with the public on where the funds are going. I'm hugely supportive of both those programs, but go ahead.
Just to clarify, the 1 million for ASC going to OPS is for 2025 budget, which is outside of our scope, which is why we don't make mention of it. So.
Okay. Well, notwithstanding, it's still on the website today. So I think that needs to be corrected, because I would hate to feed into the cash grab narrative, because I think all of us around this table, well, not all of us, but the majority of us are very supportive of this program and of that revenue going to the good work that we're doing. But we need to be very clear, I think, about where that revenue is going. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Madame Ganjo, for coming here today. I'll keep it just to the Office of the Auditor General as chair of the committee and the gatekeeper of a lot of it. I will save a lot of this for staff when I get to that point. I understand how it works. I've been around here 15 years. I'll get right to the questions. In retrospect, obviously, I think the red light cameras and the automated speed enforcement cameras, they're two different things, but they, like Councillor Kitts has said, it's kind of been conflated. So in retrospect, do you think there's a clear delineation in the reports between the two?
Sure, I would say absolutely. Both in our background section in our report, we clearly outline it. Even the finding headings that we refer to clearly outline every single time which program we were speaking to. That being said, I can understand if you don't live and breathe these programs, you might just think it's a camera. And I understand that, but we have done our very best to ensure, even in our recommendations, specifically each element, what we are making reference to. It's very important to us, and for members of committee, and especially for members of council that aren't usually around this table, we have a lot of people review our reports. I have the benefit of having an admin and communications officer that doesn't have an audit background, and she reviews our reports to understand from a readability perspective, to take away from our audit speak. We have team members that aren't part of the audit that go through it, so they're not knowledgeable on the various programs. So they tell us if something's not clear so we can ensure that there's minimal misinterpretation. I understand people can put their spin on a report. That happens with every single one of our reports. It's not usually due to a choice of wording. We go through a fact check process with management. They had the opportunity to ask us to make changes to provide context. And I'd say about 99% of the time in this report, we provided the context or made the changes in order to ensure everything was crystal clear.
Excellent. And obviously, as due diligence, you look at the provincial regulations guiding automated speed enforcement, the speeding tickets that people refer to as cash grab, which are completely separate set of legislation, versus the red light cameras, where there is another set of legislation, and they both have principles attached to either. When the Ford government gave us the ability to continue with the speed cameras, they're pretty prescribed. I just want to ensure that you understand, and we're just presenting it publicly, that we can't take that and just start throwing it in the general revenues with the speed cameras. It's separate from the red light cameras. Is that correct?
I can say that as directed by council, because that is the piece that we do focus on. Obviously, we do understand the elements that are legislated by the province with regards to selection, camera locations, things of that nature, and the distinction between the two programs.
Excellent. And I guess one of the final parts of the puzzle is nothing's been done in a vacuum. Since 2019, at the time, I believe it was Chair Deans of the Police Board, there was these discussions about the red light camera revenue, which doesn't have the same guidance as the speed cameras. Very different legislation. We agree on that. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's been in every single report that has gone to finance, whether it's roll up, but it certainly has been public. Has there been any attempt to hide it that you discovered, Or has it always just been part of a line item that has been part of our finances every single year?
As I previously mentioned, Chair, we didn't see anything indicating that there was anything untowards purposely being done by staff. That's not what we're stating. We're just stating that a direction, from our review and our audit was not followed. We understand their rationale. We just weren't sure if that was clearly understood by all members of council, and that's why we are raising that in order to ensure that everybody is on the same page.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of it. We have a lot of people that are still, they may have not been around the table. They don't realize, maybe read the report. But certainly when I get to questions of staff, I'll certainly ask them more questions to support. And I want to thank you because I truly believe this is more of a communications challenge because you've quite clearly outlined 2025 report for the ASC money. And that's a whole other discussion that we can have is outside of the scope of what this is doing here. Would that be correct?
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tierney, for getting that very clear. And thank you to the Auditor General. Teresa, sorry, Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for this audit. I think it's really important. We all have concerns of safety in our wards. I mean, there was a walking school bus this morning in my area, and I'm always hearing from the parents about the importance of those speed cameras and the safety measures that we need from the road safety plan. So that's the whole point of it. We have to remind ourselves this is about pedestrian safety because that is the key. And it's a revenue source. What I wanted to ask you was, in comparison with other cities, is there any model out there? I mean, we were working with the processing center with Toronto, but was Toronto better in terms of being a little clearer about the way they funded their road safety? Maybe they call it something else, or any other city that has good examples, more clear examples of how the revenue was used.
Chair, I'll start off and then hand it over to Clinton. What I can say is we obviously did benchmarking with regards to kind of program processes and looking at best practices. So as we'd mentioned in our report, and I'd mentioned just in our closing that we saw a lot of best practices that the city was following suit with a lot of municipalities. Specifically with regards to your question, I will pass it over to Clinton.
Yes, thank you for the question. So through you, Chair, we did look at a number of different municipalities and tried to get an understanding of how they're selecting sites, how they're processing, tracking costs, performance measurement, even sharing of information, trying to see what kind of best practices are out there. So when we talk about these programs, I think it's important to understand the maturity. I mean, the red light camera has been around since around early 2000s, and ASC is quite new. So when we were looking at ASC, I'll speak to that in particular. That's a program that is still being figured out to a certain extent in other municipalities. So if I was to look at the city of Ottawa and benchmark it against some of those other jurisdictions, there isn't one model that's been established. I think that there's work that's being done to get to that point. But because it's still a fairly new program, a lot of those things are still being figured out. So I wouldn't say that the city of Ottawa is outside of the norm of anything that we saw when we were chatting with other municipalities, but it's not a situation where there's uniformity across those municipalities, at least not at this point.
Okay, thank you. Just as long as we keep in mind what the reason we're slowing down that traffic is not to get money. But when I think of St. Rose de Lima and the kids crossing that street at Bayshore, a very busy street, that was one of the first speed cameras. And it meant that cars are slowing down and kids can cross safely. So as long as we keep that in mind, and thank you for your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor DesRoches.
Thanks very much, Chair. First, I want to commend this committee for initiating this audit. I think many of us around council, those who are new, wanted this audit to happen because we do get questions from residents, probably less so from my experience on the red light camera, but certainly questions from those who received a ticket as a result of the speed cameras. So there's a lot of interest in this, and I commend this committee for taking this on so that we can get the wiring right, so that we can align our priorities and policies with the will of council. I want to take advantage of your safety expert, General, Auditor General, on safety. I've got in my ward some instances, some infrastructure where we put in traffic calming, and it's not effective to 100% in the sense that you still have people rolling through stop signs, you still have aggressive driving in between the speed humps and cushions. And I'm wondering if the expert can just talk about how they see in the continuum of road safety that the police are part of that, because you need an enforcement. It's not just an investment in TTC.
Through you, Chair. Councillor, thank you for the question. I do not want to get into Ottawa Police Services responsibility and territory. That is outside of my purview and outside of the scope of this audit. If there was another question specific to our subject matter expert that you would like to direct that's not OPS related, I'd be happy to bring them to the table.
Well, the police are part of the road safety program, though, right? They're a partner at the table when we're dealing with. Maybe I can ask the question to staff in terms of their involvement. But when you talk about, the enforcement, when you talk about ride programs, when you talk about the automated analysis, the automated systems for license plates and that. So I'll ask it to staff. I'll move to my next question on just on performance measures, and I appreciate that revenue shouldn't be a performance measure. But at the end of the day, when you have less revenue from the red light camera, that means there are fewer infractions. So maybe can you just expand on what's your expectations for performance measures? For me, if we collect zero, or if there's limited number of tickets that are issued, then we've contributed significantly to the safety of that intersection as intended.
Chair, I'll start off and hand it over to Joanne. I would 100% agree with you, Councillor. Obviously, the lower the revenues, the better off we are if those cameras are working. That's what this program is meant to do. And as we mentioned in our report, staff are seeing a decrease in fatal collisions. This is a good news story. That's why I don't want us to take away from those key elements that we are raising. And I'll let Joanne add to that.
Thank you for the question. And I echo what the Auditor General says. Absolutely. That is definitely an indicator, and we should be reporting that as well. But some of the other elements that just demonstrate that the programs are working are indicators related to collisions, tickets issued, just angle collisions, speeding. So there's a multitude of them. Some of them are being reported, some of them are not. So that's what our finding really is to have that fulsome set of indicators that really do let the public know that the programs are working.
Okay.
Specifically related to these two programs.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the answers. And I mean, at the end of the day, the substitute of this would have been to have police enforcement at these intersections, which they don't have the resources to do this. So this is a dedicated tool that I think is effective, certainly for the red lights and for speeding as well, which is less of the focus of this audit. But again, I appreciate the good work that went into this. I'm glad it was done. It helps me with my responses to constituents. There's some things we need to tighten up, but I think council will do the right thing in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. I heard from the Auditor General her explanation about how she cannot comment in advance of this committee meeting once her report has been released, and I understand the reasons behind that. But for clarity, can the chair or members of the committee comment if they're asked in the media, or is there a complete blanket until the matter comes before this committee?
Chair, obviously that's a clerk-related process, and I cannot dictate what members of council can and cannot do.
Sure. Okay. So it would seem odd that we have that chasm between the two, but I'll park that for now. Is there going to be any additional statement from your office today, or I'll follow up with staff? There still seems to be, if you read the headlines going into this meeting from the media, certainly uncertainty about what your report actually means. I think some of the headlines are grossly misleading. Are there any plans for an additional statement to clarify what your report means?
Chair, first and foremost, I believe that's what today's meeting is to do, is to clarify those pieces where we thought that there was inaccuracies. We tried to clarify that, one, in our presentation, and two, with my closing remarks on the report itself. It's very important for members of council to understand that I do not generally intervene in members of the media with what they state. There's a freedom of speech. They get to write what they want to write. There are many instances where we table the day of, and they still state things that are incorrect. I would be sitting here with a lot of remarks back to media. Where we do go back to them, and I have on a couple of instances, is if they physically quote my office incorrectly. So if they put a statement in quotes that I have said that I have not said, I will do so. There was one number that we believed was grossly misstated, and that was the 41 million that they made reference to. So I ensured that Joanne made that clear. I'm making that clear again. That one I have no problems going back to media on. If reporters choose to make something lavish, there's not much I can do on that point. We release a highlights document in order to try to narrow things down on what, members of the public should care and what we're trying to say. It's why we started doing that document, that summary document, so people don't read a line and decide they're just going to publish that since they haven't read the report. What I can also state, going back to my process, while it's not a done decision, I am looking forward to significantly shortening the release time of our reports. It will result in committee having to have a motion to introduce reports. But I do want to ensure that we're at least giving a day for members of committee when we have 4 or 5 reports that they can read them. And that if people want to delegate on important matters, like June, we have a supportive housing audit. We're going to have city partners that are going to want to speak to that. September, we have an audit on the development application process. I assure you, we're going to have developers at this table. And if we want to get the best out of our reports, if we want to bring the best value, it's something that I feel that we need to do. So to your question, Councillor, if it's egregious, I will correct it. If it's grandstanding, the media has a right to do what they want to do, whether I like it or not.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And certainly I'm here today to get the facts and, accuracy and to do my bit as well for a program that we were very clear what we would be doing with the revenues and what we would not be doing. My other question is just regarding your first recommendation, best practices on location criteria and evidence with respect to the use of the cameras. Can you just, so I'm 100% clear, clarify what your expectation is with respect to your recommendation? Are you requesting that there be greater communication and an establishment of criteria of these locations, that there's evidence that not just they're needed, but they're also effective in the locations where staff have recommended they be installed?
Chair, in summary, yes, I would say that is what we're trying to get at, Councillor. At the end of the day, there's only so many funds going into the program, and lack of a better expression, you want to get the most bang for your buck.
Exactly.
And so that's what we're trying to help staff achieve, is to have, reach the greatest road safety levels with the limited funds that the city has to invest with.
Fair enough. Thanks very much for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Thanks for that question and comment, because, I do definitely, as chair, see audit committee as a separate committee, as it's very different from other committees, because we have an auditor general's report, and I think that's different from a staff report. I will say, I sent out the email to say to people, this is a complicated issue and it will be straightened out at committee, and let's all try to wait for that. And I made sure every councillor came. So, but I hear you, as the confusion went on, we all contemplated, should we do anything? But the reality is the report wasn't even tabled. And that's slightly different from a staff report. So in my own personal opinion, I would find it disrespectful to go out and make a big comment before the Auditor General has an opportunity to present and staff have an opportunity to answer, because I think audits are different from other reports. So, but I really appreciate that question because I think that's helpful for the audit committee going forward. And I definitely appreciate councillors that reached out ahead of time to say, Councillor Curry, is there confusion here? I'm confused. So anyway, but here we are today, getting it all clear. So thank you, Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. I understand the question there about going out to the public prior to the report being tabled. As far as I'm concerned, as soon as the report is issued on the website, it's public to a degree. And I know that myself and the public learned a lot about this program from the comments that did go out to the public. Whether they're all accurate or they need to be revisited, at the very least, it shines light into it. And I don't think I'd have as much of an understanding about this as I do if it had not been for people speaking publicly. So I have a couple of questions for the AG. Most of my questions are to staff. And I do want to reflect on the fact that you said to a degree, this is a good news story, in that much of what your report indicated is that whether it's our automated speed enforcement or our red light cameras, that they are having a positive effect. And that is certainly what I want to take away from this, because I am one of many counselors that, we kind of take hits in the public from advocating transparently for the advancement of these programs, despite the fact that many people just hate them. And to that degree, I'm very happy to hear about those positive impacts of these programs, i.e. there's a drastic reduction in collisions. I'm very happy for that. And you're not speaking critically about that aspect of the program. The element of the program that I'm looking to find more transparency on is the allocation of revenues to new capital investments in road safety projects. That's the thing, because the program has two benefits: reductions in collisions, reductions in speeding, and greater investments so that those cameras eventually are not needed as much. So thank you for the report. So my two questions to staff: one, can you provide me clarity, because I'm trying to get a timeline on management's decisions for allocation. So I understand that during 2019, a decision to allocate a baseline of 11.75 million for the city's general allocating revenues, and that decision to allocate that would have been in effect for the 2020 budget. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. Just to clarify from our perspective, because the direction was for revenues generated by the red light cameras or the net new red light cameras after 2020, we would have focused only on 2021. So from our perspective in the conversations we had with management, it would have been whether or not any red light camera, from those red light cameras, any revenue went in 2021 and beyond. So from that perspective, the 11.75 was looked at 2021 and after.
Okay, well, I'm going to try to ask the question differently because, and I have the same question for staff, but I just want to try to get clarity. At some point, there were decisions to allocate 11.75 million to city general revenue and a decision to allocate at a cap of 3 million to OPS. Those decisions, can you answer, would those allocations have been in effect for 2020's budget year if enough revenue had been generated?
Thank you for the question. I would refer to management for clarity, but I do understand that 11.75 million was based on 2020 information.
Okay. My other question, and I appreciate the fact that when councillors were asking your office about the disconnect, let's say, between council direction and management decision, and I very much appreciate the fact that you said there is no documentation to indicate that there was any intentional contravention of council direction, but you also indicated that you saw no documentation to clarify or to lay out in plain sight where the decision to make that had been. My question, because I understand that when this decision was made and these allocations were planned out, this was pre-pandemic and they did not anticipate all of those declines in revenues. But as the pandemic ensued, because if you are scanning the documentation from 2019 or 2021 on, as we started seeing decreases in these revenues because of the pandemic, did you see any documentation from staff, from management to revisit the allocations based on decreased revenues so that council's direction could be upheld? Did you see anything from staff that said, hey, it looks like we're not getting any revenues, maybe we should rethink this?
Chair, no, we did not. We saw nothing linked to either the determination of the 11.75 or the revisitation of it.
And okay, thank you. Great. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we're going to go to questions for staff, but I did want one just clarification. The one question I had, it's hard always to ask a question from the chair, but the one question I had is red light cameras were implemented in the year 2000. So by the time we got to 2019, we really had 20 years of revenue for the city. So do you consider that basically 20 years of precedent might lead to an assumption that council would need to understand that if that average of 11.7 million per year was to go away, there would be significant reports or changes to that effect, that precedent wouldn't be enough to have staff assume that councillors would expect that 11.7 average at a minimum would continue?
Chair, as a professional, I would state that transparency on either side would have been my expectation. I understand when we say that we understand management's rationale, we do. We understand that when red light cameras start working, revenues decrease. So that makes sense. And we also all know that the pandemic has impacted traffic significantly. So all of that makes sense to me. That being said, I think when there is a direction from council, staff is to follow that if they want to change direction. My expectations is interpreting the regulations set by the municipality is that should go back to council for revisitation if that is the case.
Fair enough. Thank you for that clarification. Hence, your recommendation is that there needs to be clarity and transparency.
Correct.
Wonderful. Okay, now we are questions to staff. And first is Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And like for every good story, context is key. And we've heard a lot of questions today about why the decision was made or how the decision was made by management to adjust the allocation of funding. So Cyril, perhaps you can bring committee in on how and why that decision was made by staff.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to focus on red light camera because I think that's where the priority of the discussion has been this morning. As the chair just said, the red light camera program came in 2000. And then in 2004, 2005 timeframe, way before my time with the city, is when city council at the time decided to make that a program. So it started off as a pilot, then it officially came into a program. And I'll touch on that on the AAC in a second. Since that time, and originally that revenue was part of POA. So at the city, if you go to our non-departmental section of the budget, our quarterly reports, our annual disposition report, you will see a breakdown of the revenue elements. And in there's a POA. So that's our Provincial Offense Act. So from day one of establishment of the red light camera revenue in 2000, that's where that money went. Consistently up to 2019, that's where all that money went. And that money would go into our general revenue. And part of our general revenue is we make allocations to the capital program. So that money would come in. So we didn't mark the dollars and have a trace on where the dollar actually ended up. But that's was consistently applied, consistently reported on in the quarterly reports, the disposition report, and the budgets. In 2019, I was here at that time, and I'm still here. As the red light camera program evolved and the cameras were getting more voluminous, if you will, staff made the decision to break that out. So starting in the 2019 timeframe in the budget documentations, you would have seen a new line item in the budget and our quarterly reports and our disposition report. And if you refer to those documents today, you will see POA, and right below that, you will see red light camera. So we started separating that money out. At the same time, a funding strategy was put forward by the city and Ottawa Police Services, which was approved by the board, as part of the 2020 budget documentation to allocate up to $3 million of that program to OPS. That was in the 2019 documentation, 2020 documentation, and 2021 documentation. And in fact, it's still in the documentation today. If you refer to the 2025 Ottawa Police Services budget and you go through the details, probably around page 200 or so, you'll see a specific line that says red light camera revenue. So it's clearly there. And at the same time, when that decision was made, we were seeing red light camera revenue grow. So that's obviously the revenue is part of I'll call it a simple equation. Number of tickets issued, driven by the volume and the cost per ticket. So as we were seeing that revenue grow, we were increasing our base budget. Come 2020, the pandemic hit, and the revenues obviously tanked, if you will. And again, it's important to distinguish between a budget and actual dollars. So since that time of 2021 timeframe, we have not increased the budget of the red light camera program. If you refer to the budget documentation, you will see a base budget of $11.7 million in this year's budget, which is consistent with what was there for the past 2 or 3 years. You will see that $3 million in the Ottawa Police Services budget, which is consistent with what I just said. So if we were to, again, the assumption would be obviously that new cameras would generate more revenue, but it's an equation, just like our ridership in transit, just like in our recreational program subscriptions. As we offer more, you would expect revenue to grow. So we haven't increased that budget, and nor have we moved money over because we haven't received the actual dollars. As part of the ASE program is quite different than the red light camera program. So that's really the premise of that. There's also 2 subsequent reports that are really important to refer to when it comes to the Road Safety Action Plan. Again, Alana and team reports back on that on an annual basis. In 2019, there was a report. In the 2021 March report, I actually listened to it last night as I was going through documentation. The same question came up in terms of the net new cameras. And finance staff at the time answered that question clearly. Incremental revenue from new red light cameras would be allocated there. So we haven't seen that incremental revenue from a base perspective. In the 2021 report, which I would deem to be the final report to establish the ASE program as a program, and that's when we established direction from council to create the Road Safety Action Plan Reserve. In the financial implications, it did state no tax implications. So I do understand the details and the letter of the law approach and some of the confusion for those that may have not been around through the journey of these programs. But our staff has followed council direction and been very transparent in terms of how that is reported. Staff is also agreeing with the Auditor General's recommendation to look at that allocation. And as we should, traffic conditions have changed, driving patterns have changed, the demographics of how people travel, coming to work has changed. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to recalibrate and look at what that looks like. Another important piece of information that's also important to highlight, over the past 5 budgets, so since 2021, the 10.7 may not have been allocated, but we've actually allocated $21.7 million of tax dollars to road safety initiatives. So the program is much better off than what it otherwise would have been in terms of someone's interpretation of what was done and what wasn't done. So hopefully that clears a good chronological order of what's occurred.
Thank you very much for that. And that's important context. And I agree with the Auditor General's report. I'm pleased to see that management has agreed that explaining this differently and undertaking a review is important, because I think there was communications failure here. And with these types of programs, it's important that members of the public buy into them and they understand that it isn't a tax grab. It's a fine for breaking the law. And I can say for myself, I have no problem explaining to residents that I prefer those who break the law to pay for the solution. I think that's smart. And I also think it helps council move forward with their strategic priorities. But I want to make sure that, and I want you to confirm this again, Cyril, has the Road Safety Action Plan been negatively impacted by the decisions of management, or has there been a net positive financial impact to the Road Safety Action Plan?
Chair, there's been a net positive impact to the program.
Thank you very much. And when you're looking at the review in the future as we undertake this to address the audit recommendation, how can you communicate in plain language, both to council and members of the public, to ensure that there's a solid understanding as to how these revenues come in, how we manage them, and then eventually how we spend them?
Chair, that's a great question. And I got to say, Councillor Johnson and Councillor Tierney had the same line of questioning during the budget process in December. And I think, as a reminder, this term of council, one of the objectives was to be much more clear and transparent in terms of the understanding of the the beast of the budget, as I call it. It's a $5 billion budget. It's very complex. I think staff has done a great job as per the direction of council to kind of make that more digestible. And if you refer to the budget magazine that we released 2 years ago and enhanced in the past budget, and we're going to enhance that in the next budget, we've kind of stripped some of those things out that the public and residents are interested in seeing. So as I do the ward consultations during the budget cycle, I take all that feedback, and we have this supplemental document to make it easier to understand on some of these programs. Our budget documentation is well over 1,200 pages. We have well over 6,500 cost centers. We have well over 3,500 cost elements. So what does that mean? There's literally millions and millions and millions of line items that goes on behind the scenes. The intent of that document is to make sure we're clear on those types of programs. If you refer to the budget documentation, you cannot see a line item specifically in the beast of the budget for winter operations, as an example. The budget magazine provides that detail. So that's one of the things that we can use as an opportunity to not only refining the reporting through Alana's Road Safety Report, but also kind of close the loop, if you will, in the budget documentation to have a little section, or we do have road safety in that book. We can add to that just to kind of make sure it's clearer.
And thank you very much. And I certainly appreciate the Police Services Board putting a motion forward and passing that to also clarify how these funds are used on OPS side of the ledger. And Madam Chair, just another thank you to the Auditor General. This audit demonstrates why it's important to have an effective and independent Office of the Auditor General. I'm disappointed to hear that we're going to be cutting down the timeline as to when we publish reports, but I understand why now that we're going to do that. It's unfortunate that some of our colleagues couldn't have waited for more information before making statements to the public through the media. But I guess now that's the hand we've been dealt, and that's the hand we have to play. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. I just have a couple quick questions. I guess my first question would be for Alain. Is it a requirement to have a road safety action plan for the city? Is it legislated at all?
Madam Chair, no, it's not legislated. What's legislated is basically if you have a program, how the program is to be administered, the types of signs that are required, the photographs, the details for the infractions and the evaluation, but not the plan itself. That's something that's imposed by the city.
Okay, excellent. So when you were developing a road safety action plan, you've got a whole host of partners that are part of this program, including the OPS. Was there ever any discussion about not having that OPS component in there?
Sir, Madam Chair, can you clarify the question?
So when I look at the road safety action plan, I see lots of actions that include work that is done by the police, for example, ride programs, that sort of thing. Was there ever any discussion about having just a road safety action plan just specific to what was in the city's purview?
Madam Chair, the reality is when we're dealing with road safety, the police is basically a partner in those efforts. We work very closely with the police. Safer Roads Ottawa is a prime example in terms of close collaboration between the city and the police on road safety. So it very much is a collaborative effort.
Okay, yeah, thanks. The reason why I'm asking is I've gotten a lot of questions from the public asking why the police are involved and why the money isn't going directly just to the city in terms of PXOs and these type of things, why the investments aren't being made in the ward. So I just wanted to get that background. I just have a quick question for the clerk's office just on process, if that's okay. It was a question that I asked previously to the Auditor General with respect to when a motion is presented, is it automatically assumed that that supersedes any previous motion? And I'm just a little bit curious about, is there ever any tracking of these implications?
Madam Chair, I think the CFO did a really good job of walking through the series of decision points and communications with council around that direction and the subsequent budgets. I think it might be helpful to answer in a general sense that when council gives a direction in a general sense on a matter related to funding allocations, that is then considered annually through the budget process. So in other words, council can and must confirm annually through their budget process the specific allocations of revenues and expenditures in a given year. If that answers your question, Councillor.
Yeah, it does. I appreciate all the clarity today because it certainly was difficult. I know I've looked through documentation from OPS and previous documentations. And I appreciate the clarification and the commitment that is being made in the recommendations in the AJ's report. Thank you.
Thank you. No more committee members. So Councillor Dudas.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted to thank you, Cyril, for that clarification about the process and the timelines. And I fully understand that the question for staff was, which direction from council to follow. The letter of the original intention was for all revenue from the red light cameras to go to the reserve fund, but the spirit of the direction clearly sought to not impact the existing monies going into city operations. I really just have one question. Why didn't staff seek clarification or further direction from council sooner? Why did it take an audit for us to hear that there was some confusion around the intent?
Chair, I wouldn't say there's confusion. I think staff did exactly what the report said. It did say no tax implications. And when you look at going back to the year 2000 of how that revenue was flowed, the reality is from a budget perspective, the letter of the law if you have 100 cameras today and you're generating $10 million and you install camera 101, you would expect you would generate 10 million plus something. So you would expect that would be additional revenue that would then go over to the program. That didn't occur because of the change in pandemic, but it also stated no tax implications. So and we didn't increase the base budget beyond that point. So if in 2023, a little bit of information from a 2021 perspective, the actual revenue was at 6.7 million. 2023, now that we're coming out of the pandemic, we saw it up to 12.3. So as we're trying to find that right point to recalibrate, that's the challenge. How can you recalibrate when you have 5 years of data, 3 of which is during a pandemic? So that's the work that we need to do now is, look at how we can recalibrate that to make sure the right calibration is there, but no tax implications. And we'll provide that detail back.
And I do understand that is particularly in the weeds. And, we as council, we have a full budget in front of us, a $5 billion budget that we have to try to absorb when you and your team are able to kind of delve into that. I am appreciative of the fact that you are so willing to accept the Auditor General's recommendations. And I would say, much to Councillor Brown's point, this seems to be an issue of communication and an assumption that council understood what was happening when we weren't quite aware, and that the public had an understanding. And I think that very much, I'm listening to what you're saying, and it all makes sense. And even the Auditor General rating this at one of the lowest priorities, I don't, I have a sense of solace in that. But once again, not only did council have some confusion about this, but the public did as well. So let's take this as lessons learned moving forward. And once again, I am grateful that this was uncovered so we can rectify going forward. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Plante.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Juste une petite clarification parce que vous avez mentionné que à fur et à mesure qu'on met des caméras, que la circulation, ils vont commencer à obéir les règles, que ce soit l'apaisement de la circulation ou les feux rouges. Mais on a une exception dans mon quartier, ça s'appelle le chemin King Edward. Et la raison, c'est parce que la plupart des gens qui prennent le chemin King Edward, c'est pas des gens de mon quartier. Il n'y a pas beaucoup de piétons ou de gens en vélo qui prennent King Edward. C'est des poids lourds et franchement des gens qui viennent de Gatineau ou d'Ottawa qui vont travailler des deux côtés de la rivière. Alors, et si tu lis les manchettes ou même les rapports qui viennent au conseil, c'est les caméras qui sont les plus rentables. Année après année après année. Alors, je voulais juste apporter cette précision parce que je trouve que c'est important qu'on est en train de fournir beaucoup d'argent au Road Safety Action Plan et on ne voit pas d'apaisement de la circulation dans mon quartier, même avec les caméras sur place. Merci.
Alain?
Madame la Présidente, je ne suis pas certain s'il y avait une question précise, mais je voulais juste clarifier qu'au niveau de la caméra qu'il y a sur la rue King Edward, fait partie d'un projet pilote sur les routes où ce qu'on voit plus d'accès de vitesse. Et on a déjà indiqué au Conseil que lorsque le projet pilote va être complété, qu'on va revenir au Conseil avec les observations et ici des recommandations sur comment aller de l'avant. Donc, il y a plus d'informations à venir plus tard cette année.
Non, et je comprends à 100%, mais il faut autre chose que des caméras sur King Edward. Ça fonctionne pas. Jusqu'à date, ça fonctionne pas.
If you have a question, sorry, because we don't have French translation on today, Counselor, if you could repeat in English, and you may get a different staff response.
Thank you. I was just pointing out that there had been a mention by our Auditor General that these cameras, in general, once they are installed, the traffic goes down in the neighborhoods which, the infractions go down in the neighborhoods in which they are installed. And the big exception is, of course, King Edward. King Edward is top of the charts all the time for both speed cameras and red light cameras, and we don't see any relief, and that's mainly because most people who use King Edward are not from the neighborhood. And I was just pointing out that for that area, we need something else. We need some other relief, because if the goal is to get people to slow down, if the goal is to get people to stop at red light cameras, it's not working in that area specifically. That's it. Thank you so much.
I don't know that this is germane to the audit, but go ahead.
Maybe I can repeat in English what I provided in French. So the piece I was clarifying is that the automated speed enforcement camera that's on King Edward is part of the pilot for high-speed locations that was approved by council. And our commitment is to continue to evaluate that pilot and come back to council later this year with observations and recommendations on how to move forward. So there's still more information to come on that location.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Counselor?
No, because you just mentioned, you said, I don't know how that's germane to the audit. It was germane to the comments that the Auditor General made about how these things generally do work, which I'm sure it is, by the way. But in this case in particular, on a very problematic street in a very low income area, they don't. That was my point. Merci.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Counselor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I do want to stay focused for the purposes of this committee on the accounting that was within the city's control. I think it's been well established that the police contributions had been debated at budget both times that they came forward. And although we may or may not agree that that allocation is appropriate, that is not relevant to this conversation at all. And I think what we're really all after is making sure that those allocations are properly documented. So the work that I did was to try and go back and see where did this assumption come from, right? So that we can understand to what extent it was reasonable for council to understand it. So in the 2021 report, we can see that recommendation 8 said the creation of road safety capital reserve fund and allocation of all net revenues from existing automated enforcements, including blah, 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 blah. And net revenue was defined in the report, which is great. So I see on page 25, net revenue was defined as obviously removed from gross, as is how that goes. And the pieces coming out were costs to operate and expand the automated speed enforcement program, and then operational costs relating to staffing requirements. So very good. Makes sense to me that we would be paying for the operation and staffing of the road safety action plan through the revenues generated. But I don't see a mention there of part of the gross also going to the tax contribution. Is that correct?
Chair, those details in that report specifically, if you refer to the table, I think it's table 1 or table 2, that's exclusively ASE. Because
Okay.
2021 is the establishment of what I would say the formal program. 2019 was still in a pilot phase. 2021 is the formal establishment of the ASE, and that's why those details were quite there. Again, red light camera since 2000 was very cursory mentioning in that report.
Okay. All right. So if I go back to the 2019 report, I see that the recommendation is the same in its language from 2019 to 2021. So I don't necessarily see in the 2019 report any discussion of gross versus net in the same way as we did with the 2021 report. Is that right? So there wasn't the opportunity to define those terms in the 2019 report?
Again, Chair, really the 2021 is the key, in my opinion, because that's when we established the road safety reserve as a component. The program was now established by council and defined what that was. That report outlined pretty much the majority of all the costs, if not all the costs at that time, in those projections at that state and time. So that was all clearly there for the net aspect of it.
Okay, but not the gross.
Correct.
I would posit that in fact, both in the 2021 and the 2019 reports, the gross, whether it was for ASE or whether it was for the red light revenue, was not mentioned in its definitions. So if I go back, the soonest that I can see where we actually talk about preserving the property tax contribution is 2004, where Councillor Legendre said that staff develop options from accelerating the number of intersections in Ottawa to be instrumented for pedestrian light safeties, increasing the number of cameras. These options should include ways of accelerating the program without affecting the property tax. So in there, we're talking about the revenues established from this program not affecting the property tax. Any more recent reports from that, you've suggested that there's a section that says that there's no tax implications. So we might be able to follow that the gross does not include the tax implications through general revenues if we were doing this analysis. Is that the most recent?
To be clear, when you talk about gross and net from an accounting perspective, the gross would be your gross revenue collected. So whatever revenue you collect, and net context would be net of the cost to run that program and those initiatives. So I wouldn't conflict that with a tax dollar in that component.
I see. So in your assertion, the gross collected does not include all revenues collected. It includes the gross revenues collected within the auspice of that program.
Just to be clear, the gross would be all revenues collected. So to be further crisp and clear, if you refer to the budget documentation that I stated, we clearly identified a red light camera revenue. If you look at the quarterly reports and the disposition report, you will see a section that says expenditures and revenues. In the red light camera program, you will see revenue and you will see some costs, because there is costs with the red light camera program as well. And then you'll see the net revenue there. So we clearly define that.
Okay. So I certainly hear that we're talking about the expenditures associated with running the program, but I would suggest that I still don't find necessarily an opportunity for council to revisit the contribution of the tax base that we've talked about. And so I am very glad to see that in the recommendation from the auditor that be revisited. I think that we can see in some of these reports where we don't discuss the tax revenue portion, that there are places where council continue to move motions that talk about all revenue minus implementation. I think there may have been opportunities with some of these reports to bring forward a reflection of that allocation still being preserved. Would you agree that is something that we could do moving forward?
Chair, I mean, hindsight, I would say that, when you talk about a well-established program like the red light camera program, consistently followed, now you have a new ASE program incoming. Perhaps there could have been an opportunity to be a little bit more clear in terms of distinguishing the two, because they tend to get bundled into one program. But that's something that we're committed to in terms of discussions at budget, yourself and Councillor Tierney, and now with the recalibration that we will add that layer of detail to our documentation.
Because I mean, 2004, just to offer some context, that was my first year out of high school. And that is where I see the most explicit mention of preserving the property tax base alongside all the other goals of the road safety revenue that we were accruing. I think that we will be able to move forward in a way that creates that transparency. I understand, for all the reasons that you've just described respectfully, that we have accounting reasons. When money goes in and out of the reserve, that looks different on a page than whether or not it's against a particular line item in a revenue or expense. I appreciate that this might have been done in an accounting way that was reasonable, but I think from an accountability perspective, it was unreasonable for council to not be able to understand the nuances of how we go out into the public and talk about the allocations for this program, which is ultimately where we end up, right? The place that we want to end up is that these programs that are effective, that are generally affordable, and that are very publicly scrutinized are defended by, you know, counselors and staff alike. And so it is a shame that we've got to this point within an
Counselor,
audit.
your time is up.
Thank you very much. That we've got to a point where we've had to, you know, talk about this in great detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Devine?
Thank you, Chair. So I want to get a bit of clarity on timeline and estimates of budgets and allocations. So as I understand, so in 2019, and forgive me if I'm just recapping here, but in 2019, management makes the decision to plan for budget allocations of 11.75 million in red light camera revenue to go to the city's general operating and an additional 3 million to go to OPS for a total of 14.75 million. Is that correct?
Chair, no, I'll correct it. In 2019, the direction was that we would start allocating funding to OPS. So it was 450K. So at the time, the total budget was increased to 9.9 million, of which 9.45 was in the city's base and 450K was established as year one of an allocation funding to OPS as part of the agreed upon funding strategy. A key component as well that I may not have mentioned to date, if we not achieve the actual, if the actual revenue collected is below budget, OPS is not receiving 3 million, just like the city is receiving less. So we allocate actuals based on the percentage. So if we don't achieve our baseline budget, OPS does not get the full allocation.
But if we had raised 11.75 million and $1, then OPS would have got $1 in that year. Before RSAP would have got $1.
We allocate the actuals based on the percentage. So right now, 20% of the budget is OPS, 80% is the city. Right. So whatever the actuals is, 20% is allocated to OPS.
But at some point, we were budgeting for anticipating revenue so that we could allocate 11.75 million to city general operating and 3 million to OPS if we raise that revenues. If we had raised those revenues, in what is the first budget year would those allocations have taken effect?
2019, Chair.
2019. So, and obviously we didn't hit those targets. So as I understand it, the total red light camera, because we have in the report, we have actuals for 2020 and beyond. As I understand it, the total red light camera revenues for 2019 were in the range of 9.3 million. And the total annual revenue for 2018 was somewhere between 8 million and 9 million. Is that correct?
Chair, that is correct.
So in other words, and what were the total RLC revenues for 2017?
Chair, 2017 was a $5 million budget and a 5.2 actual.
5.2 actual.
Yeah.
So 5.2 actual in 2017, somewhere 8 million in 2018, 9.3 million in 2019. So on a year-to-year basis, we were seeing increases of, let's say, between 10 and 12%. If my math is correct, because you're saying that we were prepared to allocate 14.75 million, effective the 2019 budget, that would have required a 56% increase in year-to-year red light camera revenues from 2019 to 2020 if we were able to make that allocation. Now, I do understand that we made these plans and budget plans prior to the pandemic, and I understand that the pandemic throws all kinds of budget projections into the trash can. But knowing that our year-to-year revenues from 2017 to 19 were around 10%, on what basis did staff budget a 56% increase in revenues from 2019 to 20 so that staff could allocate those revenues to general operating and OPS before allocating any money to road safety action plan?
Chair, the other element was in 2017, 2018, and 2020, we installed 26 incremental cameras. And when those cameras are installed, lots of times they're kind of at the tail end of the season, if you will. Obviously, our construction season, April through September. So by the time you get a full, even though there's 13 cameras installed in 2017, you're probably looking at least 2018 into 2019 before you see a real full year of incremental revenue. So the other component that we looked at was those 26 cameras that were installed over those 3 years. Up to 2016 timeframe, it was like 35 cameras, and now today we're up to 85. I think there's actually one camera being installed this year. So we've actually seen a doubling of the cameras as well since 2017.
Does that mean that staff was expecting to make sufficient revenues that they could generate more than 14.75 million and therefore could allocate revenues to road safety action plan?
Chair, that was the expectation. You didn't see that in the budget. So really what would have occurred if we parked the pandemic and volumes didn't change and we continued on, likely in the 21-22 timeframe, you would have seen a base budget increase through the budget documentation, at which point you would have seen that allocation over to the road safety reserve and then into the program.
So again, going back to the 2019 council direction that all revenues from net new cameras go to road safety action plan. So similar to the question I asked the AG, once we were in the pandemic and we were seeing that all budget projections were not as expected, were you aware of any staff discussions during that time to revisit our allocation plan so that some level of revenues could be allocated directly to road safety action plan?
Chair, yes, we look at that on an annual basis. So again, when you look at I'll kind of parse it down. If you look at the non-departmental section of our budget, there's a variety of revenue elements in there. And we look at those as offsetting, just like we do in our operational reporting and operational surplus deficits. So Atlanta's got a bad year this year because of the really harsh winter. So that, we have measures in place to offset that in other areas of reduction. So we look at the revenue elements overall. And, if we can absorb and recalibrate as needed, that's how we kind of manage that in terms of, the year-over-year changes.
One more question for you, and then a question for Public Works, if you don't mind. So on page 10 of the AG report, and in reference to the plan to allocate 14.75 million annually to general operating and to OPS, there was a line that sticks with me. The line says, given the nature of the transfer, the city did not have an expectation that the funds would specifically be used for road safety. So I asked the AG for more clarity on that question, and the AG suggested that that question is best directed to staff. So can staff provide clarity on what that might mean? Given the nature of the transfer, the city did not have an expectation that the funds would specifically be used for road safety.
Chair, if you refer to the 2019 Ottawa Police Services budget documentation, it talks about the funding strategy. There was a 3-year funding strategy that was agreed upon between the Ottawa Police Services Board and ultimately City Council, where there was a mixed bag of funding strategies, one being the $3 million build up to the $3 million base from red light camera. There was also some one-time tax stabilization funding allocated to police over that same timeframe to kind of get that base built up over time. Strategy that we use all the time. We use it this year in Ottawa Public Health, where we allocated some one-time funding from a tax stabilization reserve, given the challenges they're dealing with. So that's how it was highlighted in that report. It didn't go into specifics in saying thou shall allocate that 450, the incremental 1.8 and the final residual component to traffic. It wasn't that specific in the report, knowing that Ottawa Police spends way more than $3 million on traffic overall.
Forgive me for just repeating that in a very, very basic way. If the AG's comment is, given the nature of the transfer, the city did not have an expectation that the funds would specifically be used for road safety, might you be able to say whether you believe that statement to be accurate or inaccurate?
Chair, that would be an accurate statement.
Thank you. My last question to Alain, if you don't mind. So one of my colleagues asked about whether or not the road safety action plan had been adversely impacted by the 2019 decision. And the answer that my colleague got was no, that it had not. If the AG's report suggests that, quote, approximately 10.7 million in gross revenues had been generated by these cameras that could have been transferred to the Road Safety Reserve Fund, and if those allocations could have resulted in an additional 10.7 million in safety measures, and provided that our safety measures are effective, forgive me for asking, but would we not have had safer roads if those allocations had been allocated, if those funds had been allocated as directed?
Councillor.
Yes.
That's asking somebody to project on an alternate universe, revisionist history, really. I mean, you can see if you want to answer that question, but I don't know that that's really.
I can rephrase the question. If we had allocated the 10.7 million that the AG says could have been transferred to the Road Safety Reserve Fund as per council direction, if you had those $10.7 million allocated, would your budget over the span of those years have therefore had 10.7 million more dollars to spend than what you did have?
Madam Chair, I'll just repeat the comment that Cyril made earlier on, that there was actually more dollars that were transferred to the Road Safety Action Plan through the tax that more than offset those revenues from the red light camera.
So in other words, we could have used the money from the 10.7 million from fees and not had taken it from the tax base, therefore it wouldn't have had such an impact on the tax base?
I guess the point is that there's more. Well, there's a perception that there was 10 million less that was invested. There was actually 20 million more that was invested in that same time period. So there's a net positive 10 million over that time frame.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Brockington and then Leaper, even though he's not on this screen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly appreciate the discussion today, and at times I've been quite confused and come back to reality. And I just want to make sure that, similar to other standing committees that issue press releases following the committee, I assume there'll be one issued today. And I just want to underscore the importance of very clear layman's language to be used to set the record straight with the public and the media, that we heard some very important clarifications today. The Auditor General did not find any undoing or actions by staff, and that the recommendations she's providing are to provide clarity and better monitoring and surveillance of the programs, which is exactly what you want your audits to do. But we need to be crystal clear in our release today so we can have greater clarity. And for those of us who champion this program, we have to be able to defend it. We have to be able to understand what the audit says and what it doesn't say, to continue to stand up there, because overall red light cameras and speed enforcement cameras are good for the city of Ottawa for safety reasons, the number one reason why we installed them. Okay, that aside, again, I'm looking forward, not backward. The recommendations with respect to recommendation 1, the site selection methodologies and monitoring effectiveness. I'm very, very interested in this. I appreciate the recommendation in this report. Does staff have any clear understanding what the differences are between current practice and what the expectations are once this audit passes? I'm trying to understand what is the difference between what you're doing now versus what is recommended?
Madam Chair, I'll just pass it on to Krista Tanaka.
Sorry. Thank you through you, Chair. Yes, there's a clear understanding of how we'll proceed with that. The way in which the site selection was developed for the different types of sites, school, park, and high-speed locations, and then the rural locations that we're piloting were different. The plan is to bring them together into one process that will also allow us to prioritize between the sites. Right now, there's no way to prioritize between the sites. We have a separate prioritization for each type of site. So that's one of the components of it. Another component is to bring in some more context-sensitive specific criteria, such as land use and things like that, as well as collision information into our evaluation process.
Okay, and just with respect to process, would amendments to the criteria used have to go through the committee for approval, or will you just issue a memo and say, we've, based on the recommendations from the AG, we've now followed them, here are the modifications that we've made? Does it require committee approval?
Thank you through you, Chair. The plan is to bring back information related to our changes in the Road Safety Action Plan. A lot of the recommendations that recommend reporting back and updating the information that we share with council and committee is through the Road Safety Action Plan. So the plan is to have it in place for the 2027 site selection process.
Fair enough. And just finally, Madam Chair, as an aside, colleagues may remember 2 budget cycles ago, I attempted to swap the location of a proposed speed enforcement camera location with another one within my ward. And I'm just trying, and some colleagues said, listen, this really shouldn't be a political decision. We trust our staff to recommend locations and implement them based on where they feel they're most needed. There was strong, even the local community where this was proposed agreed not to have it. It should be in a location where the speeds are 20 kilometers higher and 10 times the volume of speed. How does staff envision if there are concerns in the future with locations, that there can at least be a dialogue with the local councillor on these types of concerns? Again, I understand we don't want politics to drive locations, but if there's evidence and to back up those concerns, whether there's an opportunity to at least have that conversation in the future.
Madam Chair, I think there's always an opportunity to have a conversation. I think the distinction that we're trying to make out of the program is there are different elements of the program, and one of the main focuses around vulnerable areas, so schools and parks. And we have a very clear and well-established programs related to that. We also have, through council approval, 2 pilots, one on high-speed corridors, one in rural villages. So that's why those are right now they're looked at distinctly, because they're really under distinct council authority. Once those programs mature, and if we come back to council with recommendations in terms of moving them forward or not, then at that point we can certainly have the discussion around, okay, how does one location compete with the other? And that's a discussion that we would have through the Road Safety Action Plan.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have 2 questions. I'm not walking into today's meeting with the mastery of the material that some of the councillors have demonstrated today, going back to 2004 councillor motions. So forgive me if I'm a little bit slow with this. The concern I've had since I read the headlines and read the audit report, I guess a week or so ago, maybe a little bit more, is that if the red light camera money, that $10.7 million that the Auditor General has identified could have been going into the reserve but haven't been, is being replaced with tax dollars. Are those, you've described that as having no net negative impact on the RSAP reserve, I think, if that's the accurate way to put it. But those tax dollars could have been otherwise allocated within our budget. By putting the money into general coffers and then taking tax dollars and putting those into the reserve as a contribution, what is the opportunity cost of that with respect to those non-red light cameras that we have? I'm concerned that we are robbing Peter to pay Paul on that.
Chair, so hopefully I'll try and be really clear. If the 10.7 went over, I would have had a bigger deficit in my red light camera line, which I would have had to plug through the tax dollars reduction. So net, it kind of flows through. So if again, those incremental revenues, call it 2 million per year from those new cameras installed after 2021. If I took that out and put over because I wasn't meeting my base, I would have had a bigger actual deficit in my year-end red light camera revenue that would have been funded by other surpluses elsewhere. So net, we've contributed 21.7 more in terms of tax dollars. But if I swapped it out, technically it's a net of 10 because I would have had a pressure in my red light camera revenue that I would have had to fill with tax dollars first and then allocate that over.
I'm not sure I follow still. So let's chat about it before council. I think that the way Councillor Johnson was describing it as almost like a Lansdowne waterfall, in which we have the bucket that fills up first, the bucket that fills up second, the bucket that fills up third, is useful. But I'm still not certain that using revenues from the red light cameras and putting those into the operational budget is better than putting those into the reserve in terms of the best allocation of the non-POA revenues that we're getting, those tax revenues. So I know it's, I apologize, and I'm sure that's frustrating, but it is complicated for me. And then the second question that I have is, again, not having the in-depth mastery of this that some of my colleagues do. What exactly will be the change stemming from your management response 1, which is reviewing how revenues from the red light camera are allocated to the Road Safety Reserve Fund? What are you actually going to propose to us in terms of a more transparent process?
So Chair, that's the work that we got to start after this is approved. One thing would be determining what the right calibrated base should be today based on the volumes that we see in a number of cameras. And whatever that decision is, if there is a flow, that flow would have to be, a transition from the red light camera revenue non-departmental into the road safety reserve. So that step doesn't occur today, like ASE. So again, the ASE revenue is exclusively in the transport or the PWIC committee in the traffic services. So the automated speed enforcement revenue is in the traffic services budget. That revenue goes in there. And then once the cost is accounted for, the net revenue goes over into the road safety reserve. And then from the road safety reserve, it gets allocated to road safety projects. Again, the red light camera revenue, which has been established since 2000, is in a non-departmental side. So the work we will have to do is determine, should we carve that out and have a piece going to the same flow? So the program is a holistic program, but that's the work that we'll do and come back. Again, we got to manage that in terms of the administrative work involved. So, do we want to be tracking revenue by 86 different cameras, by camera in terms of we can track by camera what the ticket is issued, but do we want to have an administrative red tape process where we now got to follow that ticket through the life and journey of a cash collection? So we got to balance the costs. I certainly wouldn't recommend doing that because I got to bake up my costs, which is even more or less money going. I mean, it sounds weird when I say more or less, but lesser money going to the program. So that's the work that we got to do when we do this calibration.
Why would there be the assumption, and forgive me again, why would there be the assumption that there is a calibrated base as opposed to simply putting all of those revenues into something like the ZAP reserve?
Again, at the time, given the red light camera program going back to 2000 up to the 2019, 2021 timeframe, again, that was an established base. So council recognized that that base establishment needed to be preserved. And the recommendation in the report was only the revenue from net new cameras. So again, you come down to that administrative task in terms of following the journey of a ticket for camera 101, 102, 103 from when it's issued to where it's actually collected. Because there's a number of tickets that get written off, that are invalid, et cetera, et cetera. So the intent was to keep it streamlined to ensure that we don't add layers of administration to the process, preserve the base budget from a revenue dollar perspective, while, as that time came where more revenues came in, the expectation was at the time that more revenues would come in. It would just be a simplified version of the net revenues would be allocated over. There could be scenarios in years where cameras 101, 102, 103 to 110 don't generate as much revenue in year 3 that it did in year 1, but the previous 100 cameras may generate more money. So the road safety plan actually benefits in that scenario. So it's a two-sided equation when you look at it holistically from a overall red light camera program and the volume of cameras, if that makes sense.
I think so. I think there's the opportunity, though, to simplify even further without without making assumptions that we're going to carry through with the same approaches that we did in, 2004, I guess, when this was done, because we need to tell a clearer story. And I think my confusion today is probably typical of Ottawa residents' confusion and potentially some of my colleagues as well. Councillor Brown, Councillor Dudas have both said it really clearly. We've got a communications problem. And just in terms of trying to understand a couple of these sort of questions that I have, I absolutely get what they're saying. So discussions to be had. Chair, thank you for that.
Thank you. I would agree. Communications problem, but it applies to all of us, not just one. There's not one culprit. Councillor Menard.
Thanks, Chair. And I'll be quick. And I really appreciate the explanations you're giving, Cyril, and the forthrightness with which you speak to council and committee. I find you do that all the time. Maybe it's because you're from the East Coast, but I appreciate it. Going forward, this is where we really need to focus, right? Because you're going to come back with a report in Q4 of 2025 through the RSAP, I believe. And for me, it's a matter of principle, right? It's a matter of principles and how we do this. So to me, the cost of the program should be offset by the program itself. So that staffing, infrastructure cost to set up the cameras and implement is offset by the program. I think we agree on that as a principle. Second principle, road safety as a principle is a matter of life and death. It's extremely important that we get it right. We lose many people on our roads, and it's one of the top reasons why we lose our young loved ones, right? So this is a matter of safety and life and death. As a principle, it's important that we get it right as a city. The third is we've said in the media over and over, councillors have defended it. It's not a cash cow, right? The revenues that are on top of the cost to operate should go to initiatives that improve safety. That's what we've said in the media over and over again. And I think we all agree as a principle, beyond that base to establish what is the cost of the program, that makes sense to me as a principle. As a matter of principle, the red light cameras and the ASE, it's the same for both, should reduce the need for enforcement, human resources in those trouble spots, right? You're not having a police officer parked at the corner on Smythe where you've got a 50-kilometer-hour zone where there's a ASE there anymore, or where there's a red light camera where somebody might run. Again, they're not looking for red light runners there. Police resources should be reallocated to other areas where there's problem spots, and we don't have that automated enforcement, automated red light camera issues. As a matter of principle, even though you've allocated more tax dollars to the RSAP than the program has produced, the most critical safety issues should be addressed not just by the red light cameras or ASE. Before these programs, we still fixed intersections and still invested in safety without these programs, correct? We put money in. We put in millions of dollars to fix intersections before the year 2000. We didn't have these programs. So it's not that these programs are the only thing that should be funding our safety initiatives. Of course, we go above and beyond that as a principle because of the safety of our loved ones. So, but the final principle, Chair, and I think this is the point about communication. If councillors go out and defend this program as a safety initiative and not a cash cow, and one that reinvests in safety, that reduces the need for the program itself, intersections, road narrowings, as a matter of principle, right? That needs to be true. We need to speak that truth, and it needs to be what is actually happening. So I think when you bring this back, based on the AG's good work, it's important, I think, that those principles are top of mind in how we allocate this funding. And I think we need a reallocation from where we've been. And I think you would agree with that. Is that not true, that we need a reallocation from where we're seeing it currently allocated?
Chair, yes, agree. This is what the work that we're going to do. And that's my commitment, as I demonstrated numerous times in this term, in terms of having better clarity. And that's the work that you'll see when we come back later this year.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you very much. And I want to thank both parties here. I think it's very clear that this is communications, but I'm very happy, with the exception of the last speaker, and it's no disrespect, nobody's talked about the automated speed enforcement. We cleared that out of the gate. This is not related. So listeners that are out there, anyone that got a ticket for speeding, bad on you. You sped, you got the ticket. So you can't say cash grab. This is about the red light cameras. So in 2019, we've established, Councillor Deans at the time, and ever since 2019, it's been reported out. That has been confirmed. And I'll ask you to reconfirm that. It's been in every single budget. If we didn't pass that motion in 2019, would that red light camera discussion even be part of today's discussion today?
Chair, what specific motion are you talking about? The OPS component?
Yes.
No, that wouldn't be part of it, though.
Right. So a decision that was made by council, supported by this council, whoever was in 2019 was there. We all voted for it. Councillor Deans proposed that, pushed it, and we did it. We've also established it's been in every single budget ever since. It's there. There's no transparency issue. Would that be fair to say?
Chair, that is correct.
I do agree, however, though, that from a communications perspective, we can certainly do better. And it's been very difficult for me sitting here as the transportation PWIC chair now, everybody, to sit here and watch, misinformation, disinformation, even by one media source. The other ones haven't reported out because they were waiting for this. They kind of know the procedure. I'm an old barnacle. I've been here long enough where I understand it. But again, I don't have the crayons or the patience to explain this to a lot of people. So I think we have to do better to be able to present that. So I guess I'm gonna ask, and I will be proposing a motion at council. We've made it clear that there is it's purely communications, but people have the right to know. So I'm going to be proposing that anytime red light camera revenue, or ASE revenue, I say revenue, maybe I have to change that because we haven't discussed negative numbers. We keep talking gross and net. We should use pluses and minuses for this council because I think that's the level that they're at. If we have a negative return where the staff have made a decision to go out and say, we're going to top this up, should we have not just processed the negative, the minus number against it, and then gone to council asking for the city's general revenue to be able to pay that part that was missing during those years?
Chair, on the actual side of the equation, typically what we do is in the disposition report, we try and leverage offsetting surpluses in one program to address deficits in the other program. Again, the city offers well over 150 plus services. To get into nuance of one for one, and we kind of manage it at an aggregate, and that's what we present in the disposition report and highlight, those key ins and outs to have a net.
So again, using simple terms for this council. So if we had a minus number in future, knowing you guys are doing the right thing, trying to top it up using city revenues under your authority, would you present back in the future, here's the negative number. Council's going to have to vote if we use city revenue to be able to achieve red light camera, road safety action plan targets.
Chair, I just want to make sure I'm following your line of questioning, and I don't mean to be challenging here.
Yep.
On the actual side, we do report if we fell short of the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, a lot of people aren't paying attention to that part of it, but yes.
So I think what you're going to get when we agree to, as we agree to recalibrate.
Yep.
Is have a better line of that in terms of red light camera side. On the ASE side, it's a bit easier to follow.
Right.
In the 2025 budget, we did reduce the ASE revenue because our projections have came down.
Yeah.
So when you look at our budget, we provide a 4-year plan on our capital investments, but we recalibrate that with the ASE because our ASE revenue is coming down. So I don't mean to be confusing, but I think I'm getting to where you're asking me. So the answer is yes.
Perfect. So I'm just going to say I will put a motion forward. I'll be looking for support of my council colleagues. Anytime there's anything related to red light cameras or ASEs, even though that's not part of the talk, we've discussed that. We've thoroughly beaten that to death. That's used for anything other than our road safety action plan. First must go through Public Works and Infrastructure Committee before going to Finance Committee, because I think that's probably one of the things where we're not truly painting the picture of how these things happen. We usually always go when it's a certain thing, even Environment Committee related items, sometimes just end up at Finance Committee, or transportation PWIC items end up at Finance Committee because it deals with money. But I'm going to move a motion, and would you have any objection to making sure the appropriate group, in this case PWIC, would have a presentation of any money, any revenue, or on the negative side, being presented during budget time at that committee before it goes to finance committee and down to council.
Chair, we may have to take a little bit offline and see the motion, but today's discussion from where this came from, it's really on the incremental revenues post 2020.
Right.
So as me and Alan do the work in terms of calibrating that, if we're going to strictly focus on that, and if that's what council chooses to make as a decision, that they want to stick to just the incremental cameras, that revenue could flow through the program.
Perfect.
The previous revenue needs to maintain the base, or if council chooses not to do so, there needs to be an offset to bridge that gap that will create, at which point it will have a tax implication. At which point the 2021 report said financial implications, no tax implications.
Yeah.
So that will be clear when we come back.
Yeah, and I'm kind of driving at that. If council wants that much detail, when staff are doing, in my mind, a good thing and trying to keep this program financed, moving ahead, at minimum, maybe we should have presentations at Public Works and Infrastructure Committee, and I'll ask Alain to comment. We do this, but maybe we just present it and ensure all council members understand we're going to see the tangibles of what's coming out of the Road Safety Action Plan annually before budget.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think what you can expect for this year's Road Safety Action Plan is a lot more granularity in terms of how much revenues are coming into the program, and then what are the costs to run the program, and then the investments that are going towards road safety initiatives.
Thank you. And Councillor, your 5 minutes is up there.
I have 22 seconds. I've been timing it. Thank you. So it's been obviously demonstrated here today that we simply need to read the reports. I think that's handy. Anyway, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. This question is more about how we're looking at how we don't need these red light cameras and automatic speed enforcement. I'm asking about the redesign of very badly designed roads. For the most part, we're designing roads for speed, and then we put in the cameras and to slow people down. But in actual fact, it's our problem that we caused in most cases, that we designed the roads to be fast. That was the goal. So how much are we putting into the redesigning and rethinking on our transportation master plan? That's which is coming up, because I think that's where it should go. When I think of roads that had to have automated speed enforcement, it's because they were designed to go fast. We made them too wide, and it was it's going to be a constant problem. And the cameras are a quick solution, but how are we going forward, looking at moving better towards making it more pedestrian and cycling friendly?
Madam Chair, part of the design is always the design intent is to try to build in the context. So if we're trying to build to a certain speed, is basically how do we build the roads to that certain speed? I think so that work is always ongoing in terms of how do we refine the design, recognizing that when we build roads, it's not strictly just for speed. There's no storage. There's a whole bunch of features that we designed for. I think the key thing is when we look at the areas that council's identified right now in terms of the vulnerable areas, those are around schools and parks. So yes, there is a design element to it that we need to look at, but also there's a behavior piece that we're trying to address through the Road Safety Action Plan. And that's probably our biggest challenge through the plan is how do we change people's behaviors?
Anyway, it's something we need to look at when we look at our transportation master plan. And I have to agree with the fact that we've got these cameras in, we need less OPS and presence. They can move on to other things. So I find it contradictory that we give the money to help on that when the speed cameras are actually doing the work on some of the roads. We have plenty of work for them, believe me, constant. But that's another concern. I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brown?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And question to the city manager. And I know at the time, Madam City Manager, you were the CFO, and I just wanted to provide you with an opportunity before we wrap up this portion of the committee meeting to say something, or if there's anything you'd like to add to the responses by your team on this item.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think Cyril has done a good job in terms of outlining the background. The history goes back very far with respect to the revenues and the programs that we have going back to 2000. We've talked about how those revenues were allocated over that time, and Cyril's given a very good depiction of that. There was another point in time around 2021, there was a report for the Road Safety Action Plan that went for an update. And we did talk about red light camera revenues at that point in time. And when we were talking about those revenues, we did talk about incremental revenue. So again, maintaining that base with respect to what was flowing through to the operations. So I think that's the only additional piece of information that I'd add. But I think there's been a really good conversation this morning with respect to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And councillors, thank you to all of you for asking such good questions. I want to just point out one thing Councillor Menard said, which is very true. And I know the Auditor General, well, I'm hoping the Auditor General will agree with me, that when the Auditor General spoke to councillors about this issue, as she does, she heard over and over again that councillors talk to residents about this program going, when people complain and say, I can't believe I got a ticket, that we all tend to go back and say, well, but the money goes to road safety. And we explain that to residents over and over again, right? So to Councillor Menard's point and to the Auditor General's reason for this recommendation, it's very important that we are saying accurate things to residents and that it is completely correct that we're saying that. And I think what we've all been saying in all of us is not fully correct, even though the public wants to hear that, and it is mostly correct, but it's not fully correct. And so hence the recommendation that we all need to be clear so that we can be very clear when we're speaking to residents, right? And that is the end result of any audit, I think, that people are very clear afterwards on what is done, what needs to be done, what is going to be done, and how things are currently being done. So anyway, I appreciate this conversation. I would say that if anyone wants to put in their newsletter what happened at this committee and needs clarity, there are resources. And if there's any correct information you want to correct that is out there, that would be much appreciated. But for sure, we'll have more conversation on this topic. So as for the actual report recommendation, the recommendation says that the audit committee receive the audit report and recommend that council consider and approve the recommendations. Is this report recommendation carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. I would like to take a 5-minute break so that people can maybe use the washroom. So we will return in about 5 minutes. Okay. Committee members, we have quorum and we are ready to start. So we are on item 4.2, the semi-annual report on follow-up procedures. Auditor General.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll just wait for the presentation to be shared. Merci beaucoup. Permettez-nous de vous présenter maintenant le rapport semestriel sur les procédures de suivi. Le dernier rapport sur les procédures de suivi que nous avons déposé auprès du Comité de la vérification l'a été en septembre 2024. Ce rapport porte sur les activités de la période comprise entre le 1er juillet 2024 et le 31 décembre 2024. Je vais maintenant céder la parole à Ria Khanna, directrice principale de la vérification. Désolée. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît.
This graph depicts the overall results for all 462 recommendations issued since 2019. For context, our primary focus for follow-ups has been on recommendations issued in 2019 and onwards. This graphic includes recommendations that we assess as part of this report, in previous follow-up reports, and those that we have not yet assessed. The breakdown of the status of these recommendations are as follows. The majority, being 66% of recommendations, have been closed by our office. 33%, or 151 of these recommendations, have not yet been assessed. And the final 1% showing assessed but not yet closed represents 7 recommendations that our office has previously assessed as partially complete and requires further follow-up. We have reviewed 13 recommendations since July 2024. 10 of which were closed, while the other 3 remain partially complete, requiring further follow-up. As noted in the previous semi-annual follow-up report, which was tabled with the Audit Committee in September 2024, 38 recommendations were reviewed by our office from the period of January to June 2024, resulting in a total of 51 for the year. Next slide, please. As noted in the previous slide, a total of 151 of the recommendations issued since 2019 have not yet been reviewed by our office. From these 151 recommendations, the City is responsible for 136. This graph depicts management's attestation as to the status of the 136 recommendations as at December 31st, 2024. Management is reporting that 54% of the recommendations are complete, 21% are past due, 25% are not due yet. It is important to note that these figures have not been audited by our office. Next slide, please. This slide presents information about the aging of the overdue recommendations. As can be seen from this bar chart, a total of 33 recommendations were overdue as at December 31st, 2024. Of the 33 overdue recommendations, 15 have been overdue for a year or more. Management has reported actioning five of the previously reported recommendations in this category. We understand that in some cases, interdependencies exist which have prevented their completion, and management has proposed a revised target date. These items are being monitored by our office to ensure they're completed as soon as possible for the application of our follow-up. Next slide, please. As we've done in recent follow-up reports, we've highlighted areas of increased risk that we believe warrant further attention. In September and December of 2023, we issued a preliminary report on cybersecurity and an audit report on cybersecurity, respectively. As of December 2024, 2 recommendations were overdue from each report. Also, as previously reported, 4 of the 6 recommendations issued within the in-camera cybersecurity investigation are still outstanding. For your information, our office is currently performing follow-up procedures on cybersecurity, and we will bring a report forward to Audit Committee later this year. Of the 34 recommendations issued as part of the audit of facility management, 4 were to be completed by September 2023 and are now over a year overdue. These recommendations were only going to be completed once the service-based asset management plans were completed, which is anticipated for 2025. We have learned more recently from management that additional measures may be required to close out these recommendations. Next slide, please. If it pleases the chair, we would be happy to take any questions committee members may have related to this report. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So questions for the Office of the Auditor General? Councillor Brown?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. I'm wondering if either the Auditor General or Ria could explain the difference as to how you assess audit recommendations to how the previous Auditor General did that, assess those recommendations, because I think it's important for committee and council and certainly the public to understand the shift in how we now focus on that.
Chair, thank you very much for the question, Councillor. About 4 years ago now, we changed our process with regards to follow-up. So in the past, and very similarly to other municipal auditor general's office, provincial and the federal as well, is usually there's a set cycle every 3 or 4 years, they'll circle through and review those areas to see what actions have been taken. And that was very similar. There used to be full reports back to audit committee, a very lengthy process. Obviously, more discussion with management because where every little word usually gets scrutinized. So we tried to streamline that process for 2 reasons. 1, to bring efficiencies into our process, and 2, in order to try to get information back to committee in a timelier fashion. So what we now do is when recommendations come due, if they are deemed to be completed by management, we will put them on our list to look at as soon as we have available resources. That way we are ensuring those get closed as quickly as possible. And if they haven't been actioned adequately, then we're bringing that information back to committee on a semi-annual basis.
Thank you very much. And I think that's important for committee and the public to understand. It does provide a little bit more of an agile process for the oversight function that we're supposed to provide on behalf of the taxpayers and residents of the city. So thank you very much for that explanation.
All right, I don't see any other questions for the Auditor General. Okay, so we can go to questions of staff. Everyone's all talked out. Well, I just have one question of staff. You know, when you look at some of the recommendations that have not been completed yet, do you have some broad category headings for why? Getting into the details of any of them, and specifically some of them that are in camera, but what would be the broad category headings of why, when staff are the ones who say, we think we can get it completed by whatever date, originally they recommended that date. Why, what would be some reasons why the recommendations haven't been completed?
Thank you for that question, Chair. I just want to provide a little bit more context too before I give you a fulsome answer on the question that you asked. I know one of the things that I talk about in terms of the follow-up audits is sort of the wholesome number of recommendations that the city has received since 2015 from the Auditor General. And when you look at those recommendations, I believe there's been 709 audit recommendations since then. We've actually completed or have well underway 96% of those recommendations. So we've made significant progress, and we very much appreciate the Auditor General's work in terms of reviewing those and reviewing them in the agile way that herself and her team do. And since the completion of the follow-up audit that you have before you today, I can tell you that staff have continued their work. We've since closed, I believe, 14 additional recommendations, 8 of which fall into that aging that you have in front of you today. So if you look at that completion percentage in terms of management's view of it, we're almost at 98%. So moving very quickly in terms of addressing those. Some of the pieces that you have before you today, and you look at the high-risk audit recommendations that are still outstanding, cybersecurity and the facilities management audit. Cybersecurity has turned out to be an extremely complex issue across the organization. As you know, it cuts across many departments. There's significant work that's happening there. One of the things that I'm pleased to say is that staff will be back to provide an update at the May FinCorp meeting. So we will be going in camera and we will talk about the audit recommendations, where we're at with all of those issues. So you'll get a very good look under the hood when we're at the May FinCorp meeting. And in terms of sort of the other piece and the other high risk audit that you're seeing where the recommendations are not yet done is around the facilities management piece. There's a significant amount of work that staff are doing at this point in terms of the asset management plan. And again, our assessment at the time, I think what has happened is it's taking us longer to move towards that deadline. Part of it being the change in the deadline, the legislated deadline from the province with respect to having our asset management plan, and then wrapping around that the work that staff have to do with respect to responding to those recommendations. I do have my colleague here, Dan, who's leading the audit responses in facility management, if there's further information that you might want on that one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Any other questions, or we'll get clarification obviously at the May meeting on some of them, but I don't see any other questions. So with that, the motion is that the audit committee recommend council receive the semi-annual report on follow-up procedures. Is this recommendation carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay, so moving along here, in camera items, there's none. Notices of motion. No, seeing none. Inquiries? Seeing none. All right, so that moves us to adjournment. And our next meeting is June the 6th. It's a Friday. Right? Yeah. So we are adjourned, and we'll see you on June the 6th. Thank you, everybody.